Thank you all for joining us tonight in this, the town center for a combined presentation of the Crossroads of Ideas and Sociology 496, the Wisconsin Idea, Past and Present. The purpose of both of these series is to explore the connections between the University of Wisconsin and the peoples of the state in which it exists. Tonight's speaker is Meg Gaines. Meg is Distinguished Clinical Professor of Law at UW-Madison and Director of the Center for Patient Partnership. Meg is one of those people who entered the UW-Madison Law School in 1980 and pretty much just plain stayed since then. And before I turn tonight's presentation over to Meg, I would like to give you a bit of a teaser. The next combined series will be Tuesday night on December 5th, and the subtitle of the lecture is, "What the hell are you doing with my tax dollars?" So please be there. Meg, thank you very much.
Good evening. I'll start with a little typo correction since, you know, I'm a lawyer. It's partnerships, plural, not the Center for Patient Partnership. So just so in case you're looking for us. I am delighted to be here to talk about the Wisconsin idea in the 21st century. It has been, well, I'm here for I guess 3 reasons. One is because you just don't say no to Patrick Brenzel. I mean, just not, you can't. Like once, maybe twice, but certainly not 3 times. You just can't do it. So I'm partly here because Patrick asked me to, and partly here because I was intrigued by, honestly, as a transplant, albeit some time ago, intrigued by learning more about the Wisconsin idea and admittedly a little defensive about what makes it so Wisconsin. And the third reason is because this strikes me, and I hope we'll talk about this more in the Q&A than I've been able to kind of develop it in the talk as it stands. But it strikes me that this is a very important question to ask, particularly now, not so much because of the political shenanigans around the Wisconsin idea and whether it should or shouldn't remain in the university's charter, but more because of this notion of of what is a public university. And I think we've been grappling for quite some time in Madison, and certainly other campuses around the country have too, to decide sort of how public is stupid, and you know, how, and whether being private is smarter for money reasons, for endowments, for fundraising and getting grants. And we've been having these awkward conversations about separating campuses and those kinds of things, and more recently even really intensive conversations about the university extension, which has economic implications for extension for this campus and for the rest of the state. And so I think this is a particularly important topic right now as it relates to the notion of a public university. Because if we don't hang on to it, we will lose it, which maybe is, you know, maybe it's a thing of the past. But if it's not, then we have to sort of think about that. So I began thinking about this with one of the most powerful quotations for me that I've encountered as an adult. It's Paul Pierce. He was the former dean of engineering. He died last year. I never met Paul, but this is an extraordinarily powerful statement to me. If the 20th century was about thinking the world apart, then the 21st century must be about thinking it back together again. It strikes me as a keen and dispassionate description of the brilliance of the 20th century, which saw humans fly an airplane, develop and use antibiotics and the polio vaccine, split the atom and drop the atomic bomb, harness nuclear energy, invent the radio, the television, the personal computer, and the internet. We were busy. And most of these changes, oh yeah, we also kind of had the first cars in the 20th century, although there's some indication that it was really in the 19th, sort of. We were busy, and most of the changes can still be seen as extraordinary developments emanating from the focused study of micro complex processes, or thinking the world apart. But thinking the world apart, separating integrated processes into their individual pieces, has unintended consequences that must, in Piercy's view, be addressed with a full-on human effort to think the world back together again. What might we create if we put the kind of energy we invested into thinking the world apart into thinking it back together again? I like this. It's like the cupcakes are going to become the big cake. I thought that was kind of... And what does any of this have to do with the Wisconsin idea or its unpaved lanes? Well, I'm glad you asked. Articulated at the start of the century that thought things apart, the Wisconsin idea is celebrated as a highway that runs from the university to the residents of the Badger State to allow the, quote, application of intelligence and reason to the problems of society. So the departure station, the university, and its experts, and the arrival station, the fortunate residents of the Badger State. Us and them. Experts and those in need. The thinking apart is in full view here, and was perhaps a necessary developmental step in the formation of a university, and perhaps even in the development of the state overall. But what comes next for the Wisconsin idea? How will it develop over the course of the 21st century? How would it change if we were committed to thinking the world back together again? This question is starting to be asked in a variety of ways in individual nooks and crannies across this campus. How can the intelligence and the reason of every family in the state serve as a beneficent influence to the university? How can the intelligence and reason of every family in the state serve as a beneficent influence to the university? This represents a fundamental shift in how we perceive, engage, and value the wisdom and contributions of the citizens of Wisconsin to the university's mission. It transforms our relationship with them by seeing them as mission-critical partners in the university's mission, teaching, research, and service, with knowledge and experience only they can bring to our enterprise. It represents a departure, a significant departure, from the dominant notions of citizens as adult students who might benefit from our expertise, or who serve as exhibits in an academic lecture on real people's problems. While still unpaved, this return lane is not untraveled. There are rich examples of this shifting paradigm across the campus today. I will offer 3 tonight for your consideration from the Center for Patient Partnerships because I know them best. I note with glee that there are others, and more every day. But before we get there, permit me to share a brief and incomplete closer look at the history of the Wisconsin idea. The Wisconsin idea was first articulated in 1904 by then University President Charles Van Hise, who declared he would, quote, never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family in the state. But attempts to define and describe the Wisconsin idea are reminiscent of the old Indian parable of the blind man and the elephant. Depending on where you are, right, picture 8 or so people around this elephant, depending on where you are, you will describe, you will hold on to some piece and say, an elephant is a snake. An elephant is like a spear. An elephant is like a fan. An elephant is like a wall. An elephant is like a trunk. An elephant is like a rope, depending on what you're holding on to, right? Well, it's not all that different from descriptions of the Wisconsin idea. The earliest mention of the Wisconsin idea, or at least of one of the earliest mentions, is around the time of Bob La Follette, where it was frequently talked about as a legislative innovation. Because actually, in La Follette's day, and some people in this room will remember even in our time, when we had a part-time legislature. And so the faculty was a quasi-arm of the part-time legislature, providing knowledge, study, and expertise to undergird the work of the legislature. So there was a real collaboration between the university faculty and the legislature. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. In 1911, Theodore Roosevelt said, "In no other state in the Union has any university done the same work for the community that has been done in Wisconsin by the University of Wisconsin." So Theodore Roosevelt was already noticing in 1911. In 1907, the UW started the UW Extension. And this really is a watershed moment in the history of outreach, at least, and of kind of this notion of the sort of brilliance of the university helping out people in the state in a practical way. And our UW Extension, I was impressed to learn, was really quite unique in those days and kind of set the tone for future extensions. I guess previously this had been sort of an extension work or outreach work had been this kind of exercise where professors went out to small communities, for instance, of farmers, and taught classes on agrochemistry and things like that. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. And so the University of Wisconsin's extension, and this is in the words of a piece written by folks at the University of Toronto, was different because unlike other extensions that were implemented at that time by other universities, the programs designed by the University of Wisconsin were not organized around the teaching of traditional disciplines, but around the educational needs of adult citizens. That's very interesting and very different, right? Organized around the needs of learners. What a shocking notion, even back in 1911. They were not based on traditional lectures, but on a variety of innovative methods, and were not an appendix of other programs, but part of an autonomous office with its own mission and funding. So innovative methods, not boring lectures. Wow, wouldn't we like to know that right now? Like, shut up, Nick. Oh, sorry. And then critically, the university, whoops, I'm going backwards, forwards. The university had its own, the extension had its own funding and its own mission, which was also different from other universities, in which it was sort of jammed into departments. So I thought that was interesting to learn. An author called Gooch in 1995 referred to the Wisconsin idea as having a practical impact on the needs, problems, and aspirations of the people. More recently, the Wisconsin Academy called it Experts Finding Solutions. And Donna Shalala, now I really should quote her all the way because that's too sassy to just quote that. The disinterested technocratic elite. She said, the Wisconsin idea has worked for a good long time because its goals have been popular beyond party lines, beyond politics. That's the disinterested part, right? The idea of a disinterested technocratic elite, as it were, the state's best and brightest, working for all, was so appealing that even after Fighting Bob La Follette's progressives became history, the tradition that universities could improve the quality of life persisted. So that's Donna Shalala. My own personal favorite, however, description is Charles McCarthy, who wrote the book called The Wisconsin Idea in 1912, and I think that's sort of the first time we have a record that it was called that. And my favorite description from him is, the Wisconsin idea is not just an abstract concept. It is at the same time a philosophy in practice, a guiding vision, and wait for it, an epistemological rupture with the past. Wow! I'm sharpening my sword. And an attitude of solidarity. Well, that's intriguing. Solidarity. And a method. Just kind of leaves that on the end. A method. I'm intrigued by Charles McCarthy's notion of the Wisconsin idea as an epistemological rupture with the past, pointing towards an attitude of solidarity. For those of you who haven't Googled epistemology recently, I have. And just as I thought, it relates to the theory of knowledge, or essentially, how we know whether we know something or we believe it. Whether something we think we know is knowledge or a belief. That's what epistemology is about. Universities are all about developing knowledge as opposed to beliefs, and so have a natural interest in the reliability of knowledge. Those descriptions of the Wisconsin idea show us that the residents of the state have long been seen as beneficiaries of the university's mission. They present problems and receive solutions and instruction about how to implement them. Their active contribution is their presentation of a problem, like children to a faculty of parents. The shift I'm thinking about and describing and interested in is one where residents of the state, farmers, laborers, patients, healthcare workers, homeless people, everyone, is seen as a mission-critical partner in the university's mission, one we cannot do without. They bring a new perspective and an opportunity to observe problems, describe them effectively, and imagine new solutions that we would not achieve without them. We study how things work in the field, and they live in that field. Their perspective strengthens the integrity of the sifting and winnowing process that leads to knowledge. Did you know, by the way, that sifting and winnowing is also associated with the University of Wisconsin? I mean, it's not just like on that plaque on Bascom Hall. It's actually, if you Google it, they'll say, a concept of learning and knowledge associated with the University of Wisconsin. I was floored to find that out because I've heard sifting and winnowing all my adult life, even before I crossed over to the Badger State. They add breadth and depth and therefore reliability to our notions of knowledge. I want to share 3 examples with you of how the residents of the state and beyond enhance our work as co-teachers, co-researchers, and co-system changers at the Center for Patient Partnerships. I want to stress again that this work is being done in various settings across campus and is a work in progress in all of those places. Education is messy. There's just no way around it. But to introduce you to the CPP, you'll first need a little background. In 1994, after teaching criminal law in the law school for 7 years, with 2 small children, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which was, in short order, metastatic to my liver. I was told to go home and think about the quality, not the quantity, of my remaining days. Needless to say, I didn't do that. Over the next 2 years, which I can only describe as a nightmarish roller coaster ride, I experienced our healthcare system up close and personal, in the Olympic speak. It was, in Dickens' words, the best of times and the worst of times. When I returned to my job teaching law, I couldn't seem to get the experience out of my mind. I had seen how rarely patients' voices were heard, considered, and valued in the healthcare experience, and how hard it was to be a full partner in my own care. I knew it was a costly missing expertise, mine was, and that lives were being needlessly lost as a result. Mine almost was. Throughout the Odyssey, I heard a lot about teamwork in healthcare, but all I saw were bosses and underlings, some nice bosses to be sure, but still not the teamwork in the sense I know it and I knew it. I played high school basketball and college squash, and I know that to play on a team, you have to actually know the strengths of your teammates so that you can play to them and know their weaknesses or liabilities too, so you can help avoid them. And if you don't train together, you don't really have that kind of in-depth knowledge about somebody else that makes it possible to work together effectively. I thought about how valuable the team concept would be in healthcare, particularly if patients were seen as integral players, and realized that in order to play together as a team, players had to be trained together. So, the Center for Patient Partnerships was born in 2000 as an interdisciplinary center of the schools of law, medicine, nursing, and pharmacy. We teach students from those disciplines, as well as social work, industrial engineering, genetic counseling, anyone with an interest in the future of healthcare, to advocate with patients diagnosed with serious illnesses. This is kind of my graphic of what we do. We bring patients' voices into the teapot through advocacy, education of professionals, future professionals, service co-design, so we help systems actually design how healthcare is offered, and from the physical environment to the processes and beyond. And we inform research, and we do research and policy advocacy in putting patients' voices, as I like to say, in the classroom, in the boardrooms, and in the halls of Congress. So that's essentially what we do. And the goal is better health outcomes, right? Better health outcomes, better experiences. So the 3 examples at the center are these. At the core of our work is what we call the direct service advocacy, where students from all these mixed disciplines come together, graduate students come together in interdisciplinary teams, and patients call us on the phone and say, I've been diagnosed with something I can't even pronounce, much less do I know what to do about it. Can you help? And we say, yes. And we listen all the way through without asking them their date of birth 3 times in the first sentence. Oy. And we basically help them in 3 ways. First, to absorb the shock of a diagnosis, to get effective in functioning in the healthcare realm. That involves two things. Sometimes it involves what I call psychic defibrillation, which is, we'll meet with somebody and they're going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I can't think of anything to do but just put the paddles on their heads and go, calm down. You have to calm down. That's terrific energy, but we actually need it to move you forward, right? We don't need you to just be running in the oh my God circle. So we help people just kind of calm down and start using the innate intelligence they have, right? Then we work with students. Now this is tricky because the students themselves haven't done it. So they're empowering patients to do something they themselves have never done, right? So that's kind of tricky, but bear with me. I told you education's messy. And they help patients find in their own life experiences the skills and attributes that they can apply to healthcare. Most people think, I don't know anything about healthcare. Never done anything but be born, and that's it. Maybe once every 5 years I go in. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you're a high school band teacher, you know better than anybody that miracles can happen between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. that you can't explain, right? Yeah. That's really useful in healthcare. If you're a homeless person, if you've ever been homeless, you know that it's darkest before the dawn. That's really useful in healthcare. And you've learned things before. Everyone's learned things before that are a different language or a different construct. It's just language, right? And we can break through that. So that's kind of the first thing we do, is help them get functional as users, as travelers, as journeyers, as captains of their own healthcare ship. Then they go careening into insurance. I'm sorry, but you figured out what treatment you want, but it's not medically necessary according to your insurance company, right? Or it's experimental according to your insurance company, or you don't have insurance, whatever. But anyway, you have an access problem. So we help patients deal with those. Sometimes we write appeals and go with a patient to the hearing and argue that this should be covered when it hasn't been. Sometimes we coach patients who want to do it themselves because they understand science or this or that, what needs to be understood. So we work with them to get over the access barriers. And finally, thirdly, we help people talk to and sort of communicate effectively with their employers. Because you know what happens? You get diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. Your employer is very kind and says, whatever you need, whatever you need. And that actually is a terrible problem because everybody says whatever you need, but they don't really mean whatever you need, okay? Which comes back later in the form of whiplash. But so we help people have real conversations with their employers about what it really means to go through healthcare treatment so they don't get frustrated at excessive absences, fire people, and most of the time they lose their health insurance at the same time, right? That's a real pickle you'd like to avoid. So that's essentially what we do in the core clinic part of the Center for Patient Partnerships. This is my very fancy slide. Do you like this slide? It's complicated. That means I'm intelligent. Do you understand? I know it's going to take you a while to figure it out, but here, let me help. So students and faculty get with patients, right? And you notice, right, the students and faculty is kind of the non-colored band around the outside, and the patients are bright red. And so that's how you know, see, this is how tricky this slide is, that when the other things are pink, it's because the patients are actually getting in there too, right? That's a tricky part of this slide. So through professional education, research, and sharing our expertise on a national and statewide and national level, we affect professional practice, issue advocacy, national boards and publications and presentations, and we work towards organizational reform, state and national policy change, and ultimately system change in healthcare. Everyone has to have a theory of change. It's all the rage right now with all the, if you wrote as many grants as I write, you know it's all the rage. Well, there it goes. Oh wait, I don't want to go there yet. Okay, so patients are teachers at the center, and the core of our mission is empowerment. of patients and students to partner fully and equally. We want to prepare professionals and patients for new roles in a healthcare system where everyone's expertise is recognized. Sounding familiar? That expertise is recognized thing? Yeah, that's from the Wisconsin idea. Yeah. And integrated into the care process. Students work with patients to help them absorb the shock, achieve access, and work with their employers. But solving problems one at a time can get frustrating, particularly when the same issues occur over and over again. So sometimes, where we can, we like to change healthcare at a policy level. Last year, some parents of children with Angelman syndrome and a variety of other genetic cognitive disorders came to us alarmed that insurance coverage for their children's therapy, speech therapy, movement, physical therapy, was being denied by insurance companies. Well, it comes to find out, turns out, that when the Affordable Care Act was passed, it mandated coverage. One of the 10 essential benefits was coverage for children with autism. So, if you're an insurer, maybe you think, great, well, we have to cover children with autism, but we don't have to cover other children with cognitive genetic disorders, so they stopped covering them. So we went with these parents to the oh God, Meg, brain. You know, what's the state employee insurance? The ETF, thank you. Thank you, Mark. He went to law school with me. He got a lot more out of it. The ETF, we went to the ETF and with a letter and said we wanted to speak with the ETF. They were not accustomed to that. They don't really have a mechanism by which you speak to them. But we insisted we wanted to speak to them. And so they had us into the conference room with the parents and the children. And we spoke to them. And then they said, well, it's this group insurance board, and the governor's mandated a $60 million cut in the state employee health insurance expenses, so I can't imagine anything's going to be added. So our students went out with our patients and did an analysis of Maryland and the other one was Missouri, maybe, 2 states which are similar demographically and economically, and did an analysis of what it cost them. It was less than 0.05% of a cost effect on the ETF, on the total state healthcare budget. So we brought that information to them and said, yeah, not a big economic change. So we then went, the parents and us, our students, to the group insurance board meeting, where they have the big meeting, and got up and testified. And when the vote was done, they did in fact cut $60 million and added only 2 things: a half-an-hour meeting to talk with your doctor at the end of your life, so end-of-life counseling, 1/2 hour, and coverage for therapy services for children with cognitive genetic disabilities. So we help them have their voices heard at the highest levels of government. So you see, we take sort of patients' experiences, we do research about it, we foster system change, which turns into which is an educational process and is part of advocacy. So that's sort of the wheel. The second example I'm going to share with you has grown up in the last couple of years. We began to feel constrained by the responsive nature of our work. That is, people had to seek our help to define the challenges we were addressing. So we wondered how we could be more proactive in choosing issues to engage. And 2 years ago, we began the Community Resource Navigators program. The Community Resource Navigators program was originally at Wingra Clinic. It's now at Wingra and Northeast Family Practice Clinic. It involves undergraduate students, the 3 in the middle, and graduate law students, the 2 on the outside. What they do is the undergraduate students put patients through a screener. You probably can't see this, but through a screener, all primary care patients who come into the clinic are offered this screening tool. And the first thing says, I worry that my food will run out before I get money to buy more. I need help with transportation. I worry that living in my house could make me or my family sick and that we are not safe in my home, and so on and so on. So it goes through housing, food desert, safety, all kinds of variety of what we call the social determinants of health. In doing this, students are learning in and from the community. They're supported by a classroom component to bring together the expertise of both the community and the scholars. When they run into issues that have a significant legal component, like people who have been evicted in Section 8 housing in a way they feel like is unfair, or that there's more that needs to be explained about that, the law students then come in and mentor the undergraduates to help frame arguments to get back into Section 8 housing or other kinds of issues that are involved. Another, and my favorite example is, so we have a ton of young people in this community, children, who live in housing that is either mold infested or roach infested. They have astronomical rates of asthma. And as of right now, right, the only thing a healthcare provider can do is write a prescription to increase your steroids. If you can imagine what a steroid dose does to a 6-year-old boy, doesn't take very much imagination to project him or her into the prison industrial complex in the not too distant future. This is the essence of the problem. If we don't get healthcare organizations engaged in helping the community solve the problems that social determinants of health pose, then we are not doing no harm in healthcare. We are doing harm. We are compounding harm. So those are issues we want to help healthcare organizations address systematically and effectively, and we think they're ultimately processes that will save money. The third example came about as we thought, I've been thinking for almost 20 years about how we can get patients as teachers in the classroom on a larger scale. You know, the shoe industry figured out a long time ago they wouldn't dream of bringing out a line of shoes unless they'd thoroughly vetted them and focus grouped them and everything else with, you know, the women and men who are going to buy them. The last thing they want is a warehouse full of shoes nobody wants, right? So they know how important consumers' voices are to the makeup of the product. But we somehow haven't figured this out in healthcare, or at least we haven't figured it out well. And so I've been frustrated by not being able to get patients' voices in the classroom. If you get them in the classroom, there's 1 or 2 of them. You might get someone say, I love my doctor, and someone else say, I hate my doctor, or, you know, diabetes is easy, or, you know, diabetes is hell, I'd rather be dead. I mean, it's just, you can't possibly have them in there in any way that is kind of fulsome and represents on some level a broader kind of experience of what it's like to have diabetes or to interact with a clinician or whatever. So we ran into this organization called DIPEX. Isn't that clever? It stands for the Database for Individual Patient Experiences. It was started by a woman who was actually a clinician, a physician, and a pharmacologist in England at Oxford University just after the year 2000. She was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she said, I know where to find out information about cancer. What I don't know where to find out any information is, how do you live with this diagnosis? What do you do with how chemo dries out your hands? How do you talk to your kids? There's nothing. just nothing. So she developed a methodology which, here I'm going to go past this one actually, which is, and there's a website now in the UK with almost 100 modules on it called Health Talk Online, sorry, healthtalk.org, and they have millions of modules, not millions, 100 modules, on everything from living with Parkinson's to taking care of someone with Alzheimer's to all kinds of stuff. So here's what they do in a nutshell. They interview 40 to 50 people. They keep interviewing until they feel like they're hearing the same things over and over again, right? So they got a maximum variation sample. Two qualitative researchers watch all the interviews. They extract themes. That's what these are. They extract themes and put them together in a module, and then have pages for each theme, describe the theme, and put snippets of patients talking. So where it says, it was really hard to talk to my mother about my depression because her mother committed suicide and I was afraid she would think that it's on there in a 20-minute snippet. So they're triaged, and so you can actually hear a huge variety. In the depression module, which is the first United States module, we now have a US site called healthexperiencesUSA.org, so we are now one of the participating countries. And there's, for instance, one of the themes in depression in young adults in the United States is depression in pets. And there are examples of how young people, pets save their lives, sometimes depressed young people. And other young people who've gotten pets and said, I can't take care of them, I can't. Or I can't take care of a dog, a cat's better for me, that kind of thing. So literally learning about what it's like to live with depression and various aspects of that. Oops, sorry, going the wrong way. Okay, so those are the three examples I'm going to give you of how we use patients as experts in our teaching, research, and system change mission. This is not a model without experts. Rather, this is a model that acknowledges expertise in a variety of places and contexts. We are teachers, researchers, and advocates, and we provide value to this equation in those capacities, to be sure. We don't coast on the wisdom of the people of the state, but we see what has always been true and name it, that this is an exchange of value, a community of learners, and not a beneficence that experts, dispassionate or otherwise, bestow upon humble farmers and laborers. Whether this is a new paradigm or just a reframing is perhaps not all that important, although I'm interested in your thoughts about that. What is important to the future of professionalism is that we see our clients and patients and constituents as the experts that they are and recognize the mission-critical nature of their domain of intelligence and reason. My hope is that we expand the Wisconsin idea in the 21st century to fully embrace the notion of a public university, where students, faculty, researchers, and all who live within the Badger State understand that each is mission critical to the effective sifting and winnowing of knowledge, which is our inheritance. Epistemological ruptures take time, and they're messy, but guided by an attitude of solidarity, we will find our way to a 21st century Wisconsin idea where we are thinking the world back together again, and where the inbound lanes, as well as the outbound lanes, are well paved and traveled. So now I'd love to hear from you all.
Thank you so much for tonight, for your speaking to this. This is incredibly meaningful to me, so I'm going to try to position it as a cancer survivor as well. And,
Good.
Speaking to, so I'm going to do, this is from both a historical perspective to now, how I'm connecting this. So I'm also a person who, I called him Uncle Larry. He was Larry Graber. He was Mr. Alfalfa for Wisconsin. He was the treasurer of Order of the Alfalfa for Wisconsin, and truly connected.
I want the tartan. Is there a tartan for the Order of the Alfalfa?
No idea. But he grew up with the Grabers of Mineral Point. And when Uncle Larry went back to Mineral Point to his family and introduced alfalfa and introduced lime to growing alfalfa and got the pushback from the UW, he talked about, he wrote his initials in lime, and of course that grew, and it had an impact on his community. They understood what he was sharing, the farmers, his family.
Right.
So there was a connection. He was of and of the UW.
Uh-huh.
So when I hear you speak of what you're doing and the intimacy, quite literally, the intimacy of a survivor who understands what it means with other people surviving and trying to navigate the system, there is community from the get-go. And what, to me, what I'm hearing you say that's possibly lost is that we no longer have people who are from the communities who grew up in Wisconsin, who were part of Robert La Follette grew up in Wisconsin. Van Heist grew up in Wisconsin. The people who created and were part of the Wisconsin idea were intimately immersed in their own communities. That's where it came from. It rose up from that. What you're doing rose up from the intimacy of the people who come to you. So my question is, how do you recreate that intimacy at a Research One like this to perpetuate the Wisconsin idea in this setting when people are coming more focused on their silos?
Well, when I started the center as an interdisciplinary center of 4 schools, 3, and then the pharmacy asked to join a few years later, I, probably naively thought that the hardest thing we would do is fight insurance companies. Well, it turns out that that's like breakfast food, I can chomp through insurance companies all day long. The hardest thing I did for me is, and continues to be the hardest thing, is interdisciplinarity on a campus that claims interdisciplinarity as its expertise. And in fairness to the university, I will say that I've known a lot of faculty who've come here from other universities and said, wow, this place is so interdisciplinary. But while it may be easy to pick up the phone and call someone from engineering and say, hey, are you interested in this? If you're trying to actually have an entity that's of, as you say, the 4 silos, right? The HVAC doesn't run that way, the plumbing doesn't run that way, the electric doesn't run that way, and the first thing they tell you after you pop the champagne that you are the first, technically the first truly interdisciplinary, past all the, UAPC and all the faculties and everything, the first thing they say is, what's your administrative home? I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, who's going to get credit for your fundraising and who's going to be liable for your salaries? Whoa, well, here we go. So it is really hard to bury interdisciplinarity very deep in the soil on, I suspect, any campus, but certainly on this one as well. But, how do you, but I love your question, because what you basically said is, how do you get intimate like that? The great thing about silos is that they make, my observation is that they make the people in them thirst for intimacy. So when I show up talking intimacy, they're like, listen, I've got this cousin and she just got diagnosed, and can you help me? I wish I could tell you how many clients I have who are physicians, nurses, the children of, the parents of, the whatever, of this people in this campus. in various schools on this campus. Because when it comes to your family and your people, you begin to see the value of the interdisciplinarity and of the raising up of intimacy to a level of expertise and importance. Yeah. So thank you for the question.
So you talked about a number of other similar ventures that are reaching out and making citizens in the state as partners and active participants. So to the extent that this is maybe a different way of looking at the research many of us do, what do you see as some of the low-hanging fruit areas where we might be able to start to move in this direction in our own work, whatever it might be?
So without knowing anybody's individual discipline, I would say that I can't really say what it is in your area, but what I will do is say at least one thing that just jumped into my head about how you would know. And I think the first step, which is another way of saying the first step, right? The first step is to listen, is to be quiet and listen. And the second step is to be quiet some more and listen some more. And the brilliance of the people of the state will gurgle up once they get over the fact that you're actually going to listen. Once they believe, just like us in the doctor's office, once you believe you're going to get past 9 seconds, you actually talk about something meaningful, right? But I didn't use the word in this talk, although I struggled with it, but because it's so like 60s and 70s, but it is a paradigm shift. It is nothing short of a paradigm shift because it means acknowledging, it means putting down the mantle of our expertise as being somehow so solo and special. We do have expertise. I mean, I'm not anti-intellectual. Do you know? I think our expertise is really important, and believe you me, the people of the state do too. Because when you need a great neurosurgeon or a fine chemist or somebody to help you, figure out this genetic mutation or, use your examples, or someone to help describe climate change and its impacts before it's too late, you're really glad for the expertise of the people of this university. So it is not anti-intellectual or anti-expertise. It is just, the point I'm making is we've always relied on citizens of the state, but we've kind of treated them as either exhibit A or people with problems, the simple child at Passover, kind of. And what we need to do is acknowledge what has always been true, just like patients and physicians, and that is that we are partners, and that there is truly nothing about me without me. So in some ways, it's giving up the illusion. So that should make it easier, right? Yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, interested in the development of the Wisconsin idea. And currently there are more international students, scholars, and even companies coming to Wisconsin. So could you talk a little bit about the ideas interpretation in this situation?
Yeah, and I knew someone would ask me this. I'm grateful for you to ask me this. I really because this was such a kind of a big sort of topic for me, I thought I'd just play in the Wisconsin realm. But I think you just bust the barriers out and you realize that the Wisconsin idea is really, first of all, a lot of other states have either adopted it or modified it or whatever, so it's the, everybody's idea. And a lot of countries and a lot of other, it is a global, tiny global, planet we live on. And I think it applies across the board. I think it's interesting that this will be a kind of a anemic comparison, but permit me the comparison. In the United States and England, patients, that is healthcare users, have developed really differently. That is, in the UK, because they have a national health system, because they lived through a war, because it developed into this kind of, interesting sort of policy level thing, patients in the United Kingdom are extremely involved at the policy level in healthcare, but are still pretty timid in the clinic. They still don't really dare, a lot of, even a younger generation doesn't dare speak, sort of talk back or fully participate, fully partner. In the United States, it's the opposite, right? Because, well, maybe because we don't have the virtue of a policy level system. We have a non-system, basically, a healthcare non-system. We've sort of developed our moxie, and also maybe because we're independent. That's what we pride ourselves on, is being independent cusses. So we pride ourselves on sort of standing up to people and being tough. And so we do that pretty well in the clinic, but we're really not very effective as a group, as a citizenry, at the policy level. So culture, my point in response to your question is that I do think culture and national culture does affect how this dynamic plays, right? The culture of the people is meaningful in terms of trying to address what would be effective in addressing the expert citizen kind of discrepancy. So I don't know how you would address that problem in other countries where I'm not as familiar with the culture. Does that make sense? I think it's different even between the states. I mean, honestly, if you listen in healthcare, you hear, in the Northeast, doctors are always talking about what a pain in the neck patients are and how they all push back all the time, and nobody trusts anybody. And in Wisconsin, I think it's much less of a, we're much more amiable, apparently. Who knew? I'm making up for all the rest of you.
So I want to be the devil's advocate here. And
good.
What seems to me throughout my lifetime is that now the public policy makers are more than ever in the denial of science, separating themselves from the universities. And that's particularly true in the environmental sciences.
Oh.
Would you comment?
Can I comment? Yeah. I agree. No devil's advocate there.
Given that reality,
okay,
how can we stand and say, well, the Wisconsin idea at all? It's national, it's international, it seems to me it's more threatened now than ever.
I agree with that too. I agree with that. And I think the notion of a public university is really threatened. I sort of said a little bit about that at the beginning. I think that's all true. And I think all the more reason, let me just say this, all the more reason to up the pressure on us as recognized experts to be part of the process of showing people who don't think of themselves as experts their own expertise. All the more reason. Like, that's just really, because then those people can turn around and vote for people who understand expertise, right? I think.
I'd like to follow up on that question. One of the issues that strikes me now in politics is that sound bites reign supreme. Apparently, it's very effective to raise money, an effective way to raise money by demonizing someone else and creating enemies. As long as that dominates the discussions that are publicized, as long as that dominates the fundraising letters that many of us get on whichever side of the issue we stand, I'm not sure how we're going to find common ground. And I think embedded in what you talk about is this notion of common ground, interacting with people, respecting people, listening to what they say. You may or may not agree with all of it, but you're not demonizing them. So do you think that the type of situation that you're describing here, that you've been able to set up, do you think the university getting into more activities like that requires us to basically withdraw a bit from the political sphere where things are so toxic? Or when you say it should re-energize us to keep pushing, do we just try to break through those at the political level who really would create these polarities and who would demonize the other side, and somehow try to get a common ground middle voice present?
I think, I don't know about you. I was reading the news today. I think we're kind of coming to a head, an apex on this meaner, stronger, tougher wins. I think we're figuring out that the emperor has no clothes. I think we're getting that. And I think, I mean, I don't know if anybody saw the results in Australia today, but, I think we're starting to figure out that good is, in fact, a stronger force than evil if it's fully applied and bravely applied. I think we're starting to get that. So the only strength I know is the strength in vulnerability. It's the only strength I trust. Because it's the only honest strength that I know of. And I think we sort of need a primer, a refresher in that in our country. That gentle is stronger.
To me, like we're a room full of university people, and we've all been or gone to the university. Our families graduated from the university. I've never heard of Center for Patient Partnerships. And I wonder how the word gets out there and how the public beyond the university family gets to know about this, because it looks like a wonderful opportunity for patient education and support, but I've never heard of it before, and I would imagine the basic community hasn't either.
So, I'm surprised you've never gotten a fundraising letter, because I consider myself an avid fundraiser, but and you can go on our website and donate. And we do depend a lot on generous support from the public, so that's a great question for starters. The reason we don't advertise is a little tricky, right? Because if we actually advertised, been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, we can help, can you just imagine how many we would get? And it's an educational program. So core to our mission are the students. That's who's at the core. The patients are sort of, our co-teachers and the syllabus on some level, right? But they're our sort of co-instructors. So we are not a social service organization. We don't take thousands of clients a year. We can't. And by the way, we work with people from, as I like to say, from Texas to Thailand and Portage to Portugal. And we've helped people all of those places and many places in between. More than half of our cases are from Wisconsin, because we sort of, you develop a reputation, and we get now way more than half of our cases are referrals from clinicians, which is great. I forgot to say this, I don't know whether it was obvious, but we don't sue anybody and we don't defend any lawsuits. So we aren't lawyers in the sense that we'll appeal internally in an insurance company, we'll help people do that, but that's actually not a court proceeding. That's an informal, basically an internal appeal. So one of the reasons I think we've gone from, you know, when we first started, we were called the Center for Patient Advocacy. I love telling this story because we had to change our name. Because the word advocacy and having a lawyer in charge in the year 2000 was sort of like we're coming at you with a spear, you know, and we're going to kill all the doctors. You know, that was kind of the, so we changed it to the Center for Patient Partnerships in one of those meetings that you've all lived through that goes on for 3 hours about what you should name something. Agony, yes, agony. And what always comes out of it, you know, they say a camel is a horse designed by a committee. The Center for Patient Partnerships is kind of a camel of a name, you know, let's just face it. But it is really what we do. We really are about engendering partnership, about showing people that it is a partnership. And partnership has built in it an equality, not a sameness, right? But an equality. Your expertise in the doctor's office is hopefully not the same, unless you're a doctor, is hopefully not the same as the doctor's. But you have expertise that, you know, any doctor worth his or her salt figures out that that's necessary. Or at least we hope the next generation will.